Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is George Ortega. I'm here with Lionel Ketchen, and we're here to talk about happiness, because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Okay, today we're going to be talking about defending our happiness. It seems in life there are just a lot of things that could potentially come between us and our happiness, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So, all right, Lionel, let's start off with the idea that a lot of times we have to defend our happiness from our desires.
Oh, I thought I was going to take it back from you. I was going to defend myself from you, George. No,
well, you may have
kidding.
to. I mean, if I'm impinging on your happiness.
Just kidding. Okay, I think that when we talk about our desires, George, I think we're at the root of maybe the problem. You know, we think we're at the root of pleasure, but our desires can really create an awful lot of havoc in our lives and an awful lot of problems, a lot of well, put it another way, how often have you entertained your desires and then been fully satisfied that, oh, this is great, you know, I'm so glad I did that, and the reward was better than anything, you know, that you'd have to get out of it. Unfortunately, that's not usually the case, and if something's good, the desire leads to more desire, and that desire gets to the point where you can never fulfill it, you know. And I mean, I love to eat, and I have a desire to eat, but if something tastes good, that's trouble. Oh, yeah. So that desire, it's a wonderful thing, it's pleasurable, it's great, but the desire has got some ramifications, it's got some negative situations going with it. So running right along desire is a lot of trouble for all of us.
Yeah, and we have to defend ourselves against that, because basically a lot of times a desire represents our wanting our will. Mm-hmm. We want something, we think something should be a certain way, and that becomes our desire. Sometimes it's conducive to our happiness, but as you were mentioning, a lot of times it just isn't. So it's very important to defend ourselves from our desire. And you know, the one desire that we don't need to defend ourselves from, mm-hmm. of course, is the desire to be very happy. Yes. Because if we have that and we actually enhance that and amplify that as much as possible, mm-hmm. that's going to set in motion, you know, the rest of our you know, ambitions, the rest of our motives.
Yeah, and as you're talking, George, I think of the in a relationship, or any relationship, even it could be between us, it could be between a husband and a wife, and it could be with a stranger in the street, you know, coming towards us and maybe not giving us enough space. Our desire may be that we don't want to have to encounter the stranger or say to them, excuse me, you're in front of me. That's a desire, but when that leads to hostility, you know, when desire steps up to hostility, or you know, that word defending is an interesting word that you've chosen, because when we defend with violence our desire, that's where desires start to become a problem. And I think a desire is fine, and I think there's other ways to define a desire. For example, I like to think of a desire in terms of something I may want. As an example, a preference. Okay, the word is a preference. I have a preference for something. You know what that means? It means if I get it, that's great. And you know what? If I don't get it, that's great. But at least I know what it is that I desire. But I don't make it into a situation that's going to make me unhappy.
Sure, and you were mentioning the idea that a lot of times other people is what we have to defend our happiness against. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's ironic, because like other people, according to the statistics, the research, are actually our greatest source of happiness. Mm-hmm. But I haven't seen any research on this, but they're probably our greatest source of unhappiness also, potentially, you know? So the idea, yeah, as you were saying, you know, when a person is potentially threatening our happiness, our feelings, our just enjoyment of life, sometimes we may want to aggress, sometimes we may want to become hostile, but of course that's not going to be conducive to our happiness. Sometimes it may be necessary, and it's to a certain extent, but we want to minimize that as much as possible. So really, yeah, when it comes to other people, it's important. For example, sometimes a person that we're with may not be very happy, and they may have like a stern expression, a very serious stern expression. Some of us may be intimidated by that. Some of us may say, hey, I can't be happy around this person because this person is just not allowing it or so. We must not be intimidated by that kind of an attitude, because it's not helpful for us and it's not helpful for the other person.
Yeah, that's true. And you raise a good point again, George, that most of our happiness and unhappiness can come from other people. And that being the case, when we use the words defending our happiness, I think it's important. I think a good way to remember how to defend your happiness is to accept what happens. In other words, you don't resist what's going on. What I mean by that is that sometimes somebody may look like they're being aggressive or may appear to be aggressive, rather than judge them automatically as being that's not a happy person, or this person wants something from me, or who knows what it might be. Not resisting them, listening to them, most of all, maintaining your happiness and then encountering the other person is the best way to defend your happiness, because when you encounter another person with happiness, you alter that other person. You affect the other person. And so you don't care, so to speak, what the other person's state of mind is. They can be whatever they choose to be, and they are, but it's up to you to choose how you're responding. And if you respond with happiness, you create the best reactions from people. If you don't, you just don't give up your happiness. Move away, change position, say goodbye, say it was nice to meet you, wish them well, but you don't have to let them make your day miserable as you go on and on with them.
And I agree with you completely. I mean, there are probably many ways to defend our happiness, but maintaining our high level of happiness is probably the best. It's got to be. Okay, also, we're not just defending our happiness from our desires and from other people, but we really have to defend our happiness from the actual culture. Because, we have a culture like from when we first start school. It's about knowledge, it's about education, it's about competition, success, then it becomes about money. And all these things that I've mentioned, they just don't make a difference for happiness generally. So like our society, our culture is guiding us in ways that are just not in our best interest in many ways, and we have to really defend ourselves against that.
Again, you're right, or we're right, George, because as I think about, in fact, one of the ways you and I got together is you sent me a letter about happiness in education in the school systems, and I responded to that letter, and that's why I'm here now with you on the show. And I said to myself, there's a guy out there who thinks happiness and education need to be brought together. I couldn't believe such a human being existed, but here you are. And you're wise beyond your years, because I think the culture has indoctrinated all of us to not value happiness, to not understand happiness. People know what happiness is for them, but there is no such thing as what happiness means or the meaning of happiness. No agreement on that. But in a sense, the culture has made people accept unhappiness, work with, certainly in a marketplace, in a workplace, to be competitive rather than cooperative. And all these things have added a lot of stress, and I think a lot of unhappiness. And if people could learn more about happiness, and I think we have to break through the cultural ties and a cultural prison, I think, in order for people to maintain happiness, understand it better, utilize it. And for me, it's a natural thing, and I think that's what you've come to understand. But culture certainly doesn't teach us that.
No, it certainly doesn't. As we know, we're a very advanced culture, technologically, economically, socially, and all. But we've got 15 countries in the world that are happier than we are. It just doesn't make sense. Lionel, you mentioned something before, though, that you said that generally there's not an agreement about what happiness is. I think in terms of the research, there's generally often not an agreement in terms of what will make us happy. In other words, personally, individually, like what, for example, for some people, like making a lot of money, acquiring a lot of power will actually make us happier, because we're all individual. But in general, and this is a very good thing for happiness research, they find that in general, throughout the world, when you ask people about happiness, they have a general understanding of it, because it's a simple concept. As we explain it on the show, it's really about enjoying life, not feeling negative emotions, negative feelings, feeling pleasure and being satisfied. And that's good because that commonality kind of tells us, like, for example, there's about 20% of us here in the United States that are about 85% happy or happier. And since happiness is such a common experience, that means that the rest of us can, raise our average level of happiness from like 70%, which is the national average, to 85 or higher, fairly easy because it is such a common experience. Okay, let's talk about defending our happiness from perfection, because a lot of times, we are like just so we're so committed, driven to try to get things right, to try to get things really right, and often, I think sometimes, very often, we miss the mark. We perhaps achieve the perfection, perhaps not, but I think a lot of times it's at the expense of our happiness.
George, it's interesting as you start talking about perfection, which I consider one of the most troubling things that as human beings we have to deal with. But then you use the words, you and I don't practice this stuff. We just get here and we start up, and if we practice it, we do a 5-hour show on this. But you use the words miss the mark. And I don't know if you realize it, but do you know what the original meaning of sin was?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Archery, sure.
Archery, miss the mark, yeah. Sure. And I think that's I think perfection is a sin, but not the way, not the way we use the word, in a normal expression, but because we've missed the mark when we're trying to be perfect. You know what you're trying to do when you're trying to be perfect? You're trying to be a perfect ideal of yourself, when all you got to be is yourself, and that's perfect. Here I am, right? Here you are. Well, I don't know what you think of yourself, but I think you're perfect, and I also think I'm perfect. Now, am I better than you? No. Am I worse than you? No. But I'm not the same as others. I have certain skills and abilities that are as good, maybe, or worse than others and better than some. That's my perfection. But to try to make it better by always pushing, to just make things better, so that I can be a better image for you, or live up to somebody else's expectations, or even my own. It's impossible. It's unhappiness.
Yeah, and it's missing the mark because, the point of our lives is not to get things as right as possible. The point is to enjoy things as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's another thing we have to defend our happiness from, and maybe this kind of encompasses everything else. We have to defend our happiness from evil, because, I'm going to define evil as that which detracts from our happiness unnecessarily. That could be like our sinfulness, just this aspects. It's like without evil, this religious concept, badness, whatever, this world would be blissful. This would be a perfectly, wonderfully happy, extremely happy world. So we have this evil, this kind of like a part of reality that threatens our happiness. That's basically what it's threatening all the time. So basically, we have to address that. We have to understand that there is an aspect of life that just is not helping us, and we have to really defend ourselves from it.
Okay, so my comment on evil would be, evil is basically ignorance. We can call it a lot of things, but once you make it something that you can't deal with and don't understand, then you make it something of, you give it power. And I'm not going to give power to something that's not good. I'm just not going to do that. But at the same token, instead of pointing a finger at evil, I think we have to turn the word around. And what do you get when you turn it upside down? You get live. Evil is live. And evil is not living. And I think you had a good description of evil when you talked about happiness. And I think living is being happy. And I think if we're being happy, we don't, in fact, being happy, we're not the only ones that have said this, but it's the highest good. Aristotle said it, the Greeks said it. We believe it, we know it, we don't believe it. And so live your life being happy, and you're creating the highest good. You don't have to worry about evil.
Right.
You just leave it alone.
Yeah, in a sense. But it is like, it's good to understand, though, like if happiness is the highest good, then the highest bad or evil would be unhappiness. It's
or
good
fear,
to understand
fear
that.
maybe?
Well, I mean,
But yeah, I'll agree, unhappiness.
right, and the other point I want to make about evil is that, as we were saying, it's not about people. It's not about evil people or something. It's about something that is part of the universe that we didn't create, we didn't ask for. But it's just I just basically define evil, not that it's like anything like so inherently wrong per se, but it's that force that prevents us from being as happy as possible. No, it's not a pejorative like indictment of evil, but it's certainly we have to recognize that when we're not very, very happy, then that aspect of reality that's preventing, we can define as evil. And it's good to understand that, because then we say that we can overcome it. We can just basically gear our understanding of life, our understanding of what we do to address whatever we feel needs to be addressed by defining it as that which is like limiting our happiness.
And if we go full circle, you can almost call evil something that doesn't give us our desire.
Yeah.
Well, and there it is. So if you don't give me what I want, it's evil.
But no, that's because like a lot of times it's not in our best interest to have what we desire.
Well,
let's
that
say.
could be true.
We might want to consider evil what prevents us from achieving our one really essential desire, and that's to be very happy.
Okay, I can agree with that.
Oh yeah. Okay. So let's see. Something else. We only have about a minute left. Let's talk about it. Just the idea of defending our happiness from just taking the easy way and just not focusing on it.
Well, I think in defending happiness, we have to become responsible for our happiness, and that's how we defend it. You're the one who has to account for yourself, and if you don't, you can't blame someone else for your unhappiness. It just won't work.
Good. Okay, great. All right, well, that's all we have time for here on the East Coast. So now we're going to join Amy Branch for our West Coast Happiness segment. Take it away, Amy.
Hi, this is Amy Branch reporting for the Happy Zone part of the Happiness Show. And today I have the most honorable guest, Dr. Robert, maybe we'll call him Bob, Dr. Bob Nozick. And Dr. Bob has written an amazing book about happiness right here. Happy for Life, Here's How to Do It. Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, this is fun. Thanks a lot for having me here, Amy.
Sure, my pleasure. I can't wait to hear your pearls of information for our viewers on how to be happy.
Yeah, well, I tell you what the book talks about really is not science-based particularly, but experiential. It really does work because, well, I know for myself, I started out at best a C-, maybe a D+ when it comes to real happiness. And so the book really charts exactly how it was that I was able to turn that around to very high degrees of happiness, and also includes, I had a group called Happy People Incorporated, HAPI, Happy. and that group, I was probably had as many people that were really, truly, deeply happy in one place as maybe has ever happened. And I had discussion groups every week with them, and that was also brought into the book.
Mm-hmm. Bob, can you bring us on that journey from that D+? And I imagine you're an A+ now?
Well, I like to leave some room for even more.
Okay.
But you know, certainly an A with heading towards A+.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am a physician, and I remember I've always been optimistic. And I just figured that once I had actually accomplished all of my major goals, then I would have the happiness I really wanted. Mm-hmm. I was totally optimistic about that. I was sure that would happen. Mm-hmm. And then watch out for what you wish for, because by 1969, I accomplished all my major goals. Mm-hmm. I had finished all my training. I was working in private practice as well as in teaching and research, half and half, and both were going well. And I was living in the city of my dreams, San Francisco. Mm-hmm. I was married to a wonderful woman. I had 2 children, just bought a new house. There was a Peggy Lee song that came out called "Is That All There Is?" Mm-hmm. And I would lie awake at night looking at the ceiling saying, Is that all there is? It was
With your D plus.
with my D plus, yeah. And all of these things that I'd gotten, they didn't do it. And that was my real desperate moment. It was absolute desperation. I like to say that it was a choice at that point of either really changing or killing myself. I quickly hastened, I was not suicidal, so I didn't really consider that, but just to show you where I was as far as decisions at that point. And but one thing I really knew, I knew an awful lot about how not to be happy. And I really basically used that to guide me. That is, every time I would come up to a decision, if I'd gone that way before, I would go the other way.
Right. You got to start somewhere.
That's right. That's right. And it worked out. It was a real trial and error thing. And I'm big on how you learn from trial and error. Because you've got to be able to be okay with error.
Right.
And you realize if something doesn't work, okay, well, that didn't work, no big tragedy. And then just use that information that you gained from what didn't work. Now, it took a long time. I mean, I again realized this in 1969. And it wasn't really until about 1986 or 7 that I really realized I had actually developed deep inner happiness. So it took a long time using my trial and error method.
I see.
And essentially the book is giving people that information so they don't have to spend all those years in getting there. I know you can do it. I know anyone could do it. And that book guides people to get there.
Bob, what is your definition of happiness?
Well, I have to go through two definitions in a way because there really are two very different kinds of happiness. And the most common one, because it's so common, I call ordinary happiness. And that's the kind of happiness that has been, you could call pleasure, but it's short-lived. Everybody gets it. And
Like an example probably would be when I would get a bouquet of flowers from a secret admirer.
Sure, that's right. Essentially, it's when anything happens in your sphere, or world, or outreach, whatever it is. If anything that happens there that you like, will give you a burst of ordinary happiness. And I define ordinary happiness that way. That is, the good feelings we get when something happens that we like. They're very simple. But then there's the other kind of happiness, which is very much rarer. And that's really tied into the idea of the set point happiness. That is a steady happiness. Now, for most people, that's thought to be limited genetically. That is, you're born with it and you're going to die with it. And I know that's not true. I know by doing certain things, you can cause that to go up. But it's inner-derived. And there are definite things you can do to get that to happen. But the fact is that you are in charge of that. Once you learn how to get it going and to maintain it and service it, then you have a happiness that doesn't come and go. It isn't dependent upon the outside world giving you something or manipulating the outside world. It's within you. It's generated within. So that kind of happiness I actually call ideal happiness because it doesn't go away and you control it and it'll last as long as you want and go as high as you want.
Now, would that be what when monks hit enlightenment? Is it similar to that?
I think it is related. Enlightenment carries a fairly, in my mind, high experience of spirituality. And spirituality, I feel, is important. But to be perfectly honest, I developed my own ideal happiness without any spirituality at all. Now, since then, I've become quite spiritual, and it does make it go up higher, but I got it even without the spiritual connection. So, in that sense, I would say, well, I wouldn't want to use enlightenment only because of the spiritual connection, which is great, but isn't essential.
Great. And why did you decide to write a book about happiness?
Well, I tell you, I got my Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame for developing my own happiness. And once that happened and I realized how rare it was and how amazed people were at this guy who just was happy pretty much all the time, and I knew that I wasn't before and that I learned it, I knew I was going to devote my life to helping others arrive and find their own deep inner, or what I like to call ideal happiness. So that's why I wrote the book. When it happened, when I developed my own, I was very busy in my medical career, and I couldn't really put full time onto it. I read and I studied and I did all that, but it was only when I actually could retire, bring myself to cut way back, which is now, and that's what I want to do now, is devote my life to showing and teaching and helping others to find their ideal happiness.
So, out of all of the happiness books out there, what sets your book apart from the rest?
It's so experiential. It is not theoretical. It is not, and I don't mean to demean science in happiness, but the trouble with happiness science is that there are billions of people. Everybody on Earth gets ordinary happiness. The number of people that have the deep inner happiness is tiny relative to that. So happiness science, by this incredible difference in numbers, essentially is the science of ordinary happiness. And this book, and again, it sounds like I'm putting ordinary happiness down, and I'm not. In fact, I've just recently thought of a new term, which is perfect happiness, and that's the combination of ordinary happiness and ideal happiness. But
sounds perfect.
It is. There you go. That's what I thought too. But this book is a very, very practical how to do it for the type of happiness which is not studied, which is relatively unknown. Yeah, people give it lip service. They say, "Oh well, yeah, inner is the best." They say that, but then they go on and talk just about ordinary happiness. That's what most other books on happiness talk about. Well, to some extent, since we all experience ordinary happiness, and since we all seek it, to some extent, everybody could write a book on ordinary happiness.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.